66 million years ago, something the size of a house cat was crouched underground while the sky above it turned to fire. It had no idea it had just inherited the Earth. An asteroid hit what is now Mexico. Within hours, heat scorched the surface. Within months, the sky went dark, and by the time it was over, roughly 3 out of every 4 species on the planet were gone. Every large predator, every giant herbivore, every dominant creature that had held its position for over 165 million years, gone. What followed should have been a slow, painful recovery, a long silence while life crept back. Instead, the opposite happened. Evolution, which had been slow and constrained for millions of years, suddenly exploded. Small, unremarkable survivors began changing at a pace that still challenges what scientists thought they understood about how life works. One small land animal walked into the ocean and never came back. Over millions of years, its legs dissolved, its body stretched, it became something unrecognizable. That same lineage eventually produced the largest animal that has ever lived on this planet. All of it, from that small creature in the dark to the world we live in today, happened in what is, geologically speaking, almost no time at all. The question is why? What actually happens to evolution when you remove every rule, clear every position, and hand the whole world to the survivors? The answer is stranger than you think, and it has everything to do with what happens when life suddenly has room to run. If deep time stories like this are why you're here, a like and a subscribe genuinely help keep them coming. It means more than you'd think. Now let's go back to the moment it all changed. In a world already spoken for, possibility narrows without ever announcing itself. Life does not pause to make room. It continues, layered upon itself, each role occupied by those who arrived earlier and refined their place across immense spans of time. Within that quiet arrangement, potential can exist without expression, held back not by weakness, but by absence of space. For 165 million years, mammals lived inside that absence. They were not failing organisms waiting for improvement. Their bodies already carried systems that in another setting would have transformed entire ecosystems. Heat flowed steadily within them, allowing activity beyond the limits of daylight or climate. Their teeth met in precise patterns, capable of breaking, slicing, and grinding a wide range of foods. Their minds processed the world with a flexibility uncommon among many of their contemporaries. In many lineages, new life developed internally, protected and nourished before entering the world. None of these traits reshaped their position. They remained small, not because they lacked the capacity to grow, but because growth had no available direction. The larger pathways of life were already occupied by forms that had settled into them long before mammals could attempt to enter. The structure of this ancient world resembled a complete system, each function carried out by those already adapted to it. Massive plant eaters moved through landscapes with bodies designed for scale, converting vegetation into motion and presence. Predators of immense size followed them, their forms tuned for pursuit and control. Between these extremes, intermediate hunters filled the remaining gradients, leaving no gap unguarded. Even above the ground, movement through air had its own occupants. Winged reptiles crossed the skies, intercepting insects and competing within a space that might otherwise have offered opportunity. The system extended in all directions, a network so thoroughly filled that new entrants, no matter how capable, found no open path. This condition is described in paleontology as incumbent advantage, a quiet but powerful force. Once a role is held by a species well adapted to it, replacement becomes extraordinarily difficult. Adaptation alone does not grant entry. The existing occupant carries the accumulated advantage of time, refinement, and established presence. Mammals lived beneath that advantage, shaped by it rather than able to overcome it. Their evolution turned inward toward survival in constrained spaces. They became creatures of limited visibility, moving through darkness and shelter, avoiding direct competition with those above them. Their size, behavior, and rhythms were not random outcomes, but precise responses to a world that offered no larger opening. Over millions of generations, this pressure refined them in ways that would later prove decisive. Flexibility became essential as food sources shifted in small, unpredictable ways. Awareness sharpened, tuned to subtle changes in sound and movement. Reproduction adapted toward protecting fewer offspring with greater investment, increasing the likelihood that each would survive. These were not temporary adjustments. They became the foundation of what mammals were. Nothing within this long span suggested an approaching shift. The system held, stable and complete, with every role accounted for and every pathway maintained by those already within it. Mammals remained where the structure allowed them to remain, carrying abilities that had no space to unfold. When the change finally arrived, it did not alter those abilities, it altered the structure itself. The barriers that had defined the limits of possibility were removed in a single, irreversible moment. The positions that had been occupied for ages ceased to exist as they had before. What had been a closed system became open, and the traits that had once existed without direction found, all at once, a world large enough to receive them. It began not on the ground, but in motion through empty space, a fragment of ancient rock crossing the inner solar system on a path that had been set long before anything on Earth could sense it. There was no gradual approach, no visible warning that altered behavior or slowed time. The trajectory remained uninterrupted until it intersected with a planet already full. The object measured roughly 12 kilometers across, moving at close to 20 kilometers per second. At that speed, the distinction between solid and energy becomes difficult to separate. When it met the surface, the release was immediate and absolute, equivalent to billions of nuclear detonations unfolding at once, though no human language existed to describe such a comparison. The first minute reshaped the ground itself. Material beneath the impact site did not shatter in the usual sense. It flowed. Rock compressed and displaced so violently that it behaved like liquid under pressure, opening a cavity 180 kilometers wide and 20 kilometers deep. Surrounding layers folded outward, then rebounded, leaving behind a structure that would remain long after the event itself had passed. Above that forming crater, a column of debris surged upward, carrying pulverized rock far beyond the atmosphere. Within minutes, the sky began to fill again, not with falling stone, but with countless droplets of melted material. As these particles re-entered the atmosphere, each released heat, spreading energy across the entire planet in a way no single explosion could achieve. For a span of time measured in tens of minutes, extending in some regions to hours, the upper atmosphere acted as a continuous source of radiant heat. Surfaces below absorbed this energy almost simultaneously, raising temperatures rapidly. Organic material exposed to open air reached ignition thresholds without direct contact with flame. The effect was widespread, not confined to a single region, but distributed across continents. Many organisms never experienced the later stages of the event. Exposure alone was sufficient. The sequence of shock waves that followed traveled more slowly than the arrival of heat, meaning that for countless living things, the first and final moment came from above, silent and invisible until it was already complete. Water responded differently. though no less dramatically. Within hours, coastlines far from the impact site encountered walls of moving ocean displaced by the force of collision. These waves rose to heights measured in hundreds of meters, crossing basins and reshaping shorelines with a force that erased previous forms. On land, combustion spread through accumulated vegetation, merging into fires that left a distinct layer within the geological record. This layer appears across continents, a thin but consistent trace marking a moment when surface conditions shifted everywhere at once. Then the sky changed again. Particles of sulfur and fine soot entered the upper atmosphere, forming a veil that reduced incoming sunlight. The brightness that had defined daily cycles diminished, replaced by a dim, diffuse glow. Within weeks, the process that supports most life, the conversion of light into energy by plants, slowed and then largely ceased. Without that foundation, systems dependent on it began to fail. Plant life declined first, followed by those that fed upon it, and then by those that depended on them. The sequence unfolded over years, not moments, as temperatures fell and energy became scarce. This period of reduced light and lowered temperature persisted for a span estimated between 2 and 8 years. It was not uniform in intensity, but its effects were global, altering conditions across land and sea alike. Through all of this, the outcome was shaped early. The initial hours determined which forms of life remained to experience the longer aftermath. Those that passed through that narrow interval carried forward into a world already transformed, becoming the starting point for everything that followed. After the long night settled over the planet, survival followed patterns that were quiet but exact. The record left behind in stone does not show chaos or chance, but a narrowing, as if life itself had been passed through a sieve that allowed only certain forms to remain. The difference between persistence and disappearance lay in traits that until that moment had carried little significance beyond local advantage. One of the clearest patterns rests in size. Creatures below roughly 25 kilograms appear again and again beyond the boundary, while larger bodies fade from the record with striking consistency. Smaller forms required less energy to sustain themselves and could exist on scattered, unpredictable resources. They could hide more easily, sheltering in spaces too confined for larger animals to enter. Their scale allowed them to pass through a world that had become fragmented and unstable. Food, too, shaped the outcome with quiet precision. Those able to consume a wide range of materials endured, not through abundance, but through flexibility. Insects, seeds, fungal growth, decomposing remains all became part of a shifting menu that changed with the altered environment. Species bound to a single food source, no matter how efficient they had once been, found themselves without options as those sources disappeared. Adaptability in diet became a form of continuity, a way of remaining present as conditions shifted beyond recognition. Shelter added another layer to this filtering. Animals that spent part of their lives within the ground or within enclosed spaces moved through the early phase of the event differently. Subsurface environments buffered sudden changes, reducing exposure to the immediate effects that swept across open landscapes. Beneath the surface, organic material persisted in altered forms, and small invertebrates continued to move through soil, offering a thin but reliable chain of energy. Water systems provided a separate refuge. Rivers and lakes, fed by accumulated organic matter rather than direct sunlight alone, maintained functioning food webs even as light diminished. Organisms within these systems drew energy from detritus, sustaining a slower but more stable cycle that allowed them to persist while other environments collapsed. The continuity of these networks offered a pathway through conditions that would have otherwise ended them, Among the few avian survivors, a similar pattern appears. The forms that remained were small, ground oriented, and capable of feeding without reliance on specialized strategies. Ornamental structures and highly specific feeding adaptations did not carry forward. Instead, the survivors were those whose behaviors allowed them to move through variable conditions without dependence on any single resource. Reptilian persistence followed yet another route. Certain lineages possessed the ability to reduce metabolic demand to extremely low levels, extending survival through long periods without food. This capacity, combined with a willingness to consume almost any available organic matter, created a resilience that did not depend on environmental stability. It allowed life to continue in intervals where activity was minimal and resources were scarce. Within mammals, three distinct lineages passed through this narrowing. Placentals, developing young within the body through a direct physiological connection, carried offspring to a more advanced stage before birth. Marsupials, with a shorter internal development, followed by external nurturing, maintained flexibility in reproductive timing. Monotremals, laying eggs, represented an even older strategy, one that persisted through its own form of resilience. These groups were not defined by superiority in the earlier world. They did not dominate landscapes or displace others through competition. Their survival reflects alignment, a convergence between their existing traits and the conditions that followed. The filtering was precise, yet indifferent. It did not select for strength, size, or complexity in the ways that had once shaped ecosystems. It favored compatibility with a world that had become reduced, irregular, and uncertain. From that narrowing, the future began, not with the most imposing forms, but with those that could endure the quiet demands of a changed planet. The boundary between one world and the next is marked by a thin layer in stone, a subtle line that separates abundance from absence. Above it, the Paleocene begins, not with noise or motion, but with a quiet reduction, as if the complexity of life had been gently lowered to its simplest form. Across the surface, the first signs of return were not towering plants or dense forests, but ferns. These small, resilient species spread across ground still covered in ash, drawing nutrients from soil that had been stripped of its previous richness. Their presence appears suddenly in the geological record, a sharp increase that traces across continents, a signal that life had begun again in its most basic expression. For hundreds of thousands of years, ecosystems remained sparse. The intricate connections that once linked species into layered systems had not yet reformed. Small animals moved through landscapes with limited structure, feeding on whatever could be found, while plant life remained low and scattered. The world functioned, but only in fragments, each part operating with minimal connection to the rest. Yet within this simplicity lay an unfamiliar condition. Space, in nearly every direction, stood unoccupied. Roles that had once been held by dominant forms were no longer present. Large plant eaters were absent, leaving vegetation free from the patterns of heavy grazing. Predatory positions that once shaped the behavior of entire communities no longer imposed their influence. The skies, once crossed by powerful wings, held fewer occupants, and the oceans lacked many of their former rulers. This absence created an environment not defined by competition, but by availability. The structure that had once limited expansion had dissolved, leaving behind a network of possibilities without immediate claim. Life, reduced in scale, now existed within a setting far larger than itself. Mammals responded within a span of time that in geological terms is almost immediate. Within 300,000 years, the fossil record begins to show a gradual increase in body size. This shift, subtle at first, marks the beginning of a broader transformation. The constraints that had shaped them for millions of years no longer applied in the same way. Growth, once restricted, became possible. The pace of this change stands in contrast to the long interval that preceded it. 300,000 years represents a fraction of the time during which mammals remained confined to smaller forms. What had once been a stable pattern began to shift with unexpected speed as new opportunities allowed existing traits to express themselves in different ways. Recovery did not occur evenly across all environments. Freshwater systems, with their reliance on accumulated organic material rather than direct sunlight alone, stabilized more quickly. Rivers and lakes supported chains of life that continued to function despite reduced light, providing a foundation from which broader ecosystems could begin to rebuild. From these aquatic centers, life extended outward. Plants diversified and spread, gradually increasing in height and density. Animals followed, moving into areas that had remained unoccupied, exploring roles that had no recent precedent. The process was not directed or coordinated, but it unfolded with a steady expansion, each step building upon the last. Over the course of the first million years, the planet did not return to its previous state. It moved forward into something entirely different, shaped not by what had been lost, but by what remained and where it could now go. In that quiet expansion, the foundations of a new world took form, one defined less by inheritance and more by opportunity. Scale began to shift quietly at first, almost too gradually to notice within a single lifetime. In the earliest Paleocene, mammals still occupied small bodies, rarely exceeding the mass of a house cat or a modest dog, moving through landscapes that had not yet fully reorganized. Their forms carried the memory of constraint, shaped by long periods in which growth offered no advantage. Then, over spans that stretch beyond individual perception but remain brief in geological time, size began to accumulate. Within roughly 25 million years, mammals produced forms that would have been inconceivable in their earlier state. Among them stood Paraceratherium, a hornless relative of modern rhinoceroses, rising approximately 5 meters at the shoulder and weighing between 15,000 and 20,000 kilograms. Its presence marks a transformation not only in scale but in possibility, a transition from small, concealed bodies to structures that shaped entire environments through their movement. The increase in maximum body mass approached a 1,000-fold expansion. This change unfolded within a window far shorter than the long interval during which mammals remained limited in size. The difference lay not in new traits appearing suddenly, but in the removal of barriers that had once prevented those traits from expressing themselves. In a landscape where large roles stood unoccupied, even slight increases in size carried immediate advantage. An animal capable of reaching higher vegetation gained access to resources beyond the range of smaller competitors. One that could travel greater distances moved between food sources that others could not connect. Incremental growth translated directly into expanded opportunity. Thermal balance contributed to this pattern in subtle but consistent ways. Larger bodies retain heat more effectively, losing energy at a slower rate relative to their volume. In climates that fluctuated or cooled, this efficiency allowed sustained activity without constant replenishment of energy. It created stability within conditions that would otherwise impose limits. Predation also shifted alongside growth. As mammals increased in size, the range of animals capable of preying upon them narrowed. Each additional increment of mass reduced vulnerability, raising the threshold at which an individual became impractical to attack. This effect did not eliminate risk entirely, but it altered the balance, allowing larger forms to invest more in feeding and movement rather than constant avoidance. These factors did not operate independently. They combined, reinforcing one another across generations. A slightly larger body improved access to food, which supported further growth, which reduced predation risk, which allowed more consistent survival and reproduction. The process repeated, each cycle building upon the previous one, creating a progression that accelerated without requiring abrupt change. Among the early contributors to this expansion were the condylarths, a group of generalized hoofed mammals whose forms appear unremarkable when compared to their later descendants. They carried weight through flat feet, moved with deliberate pacing, and possessed teeth suited for a wide range of foods rather than any single specialization. Their strength lay in this flexibility, allowing them to occupy multiple roles as environments shifted. From these generalized beginnings emerged a wide array of large-bodied herbivores that would come to define later ecosystems. The lineage extended outward, giving rise to forms that would eventually include horses, deer, rhinoceroses, and even aquatic descendants whose origins trace back to these early terrestrial ancestors. The transformation did not follow a single direction or plan. It unfolded through countless small variations, each one tested against the conditions of its time. Size increased not because it was inherently better, but because, within the newly available spaces, it consistently offered advantages that accumulated over generations. What began as a subtle drift became a defining feature of the New World, a shift in scale that reshaped how life moved, fed, and interacted, all arising from the gradual amplification of possibilities that had once been held in reserve. Silence at the top of a food web does not last. When the largest hunters disappear, the absence does not remain empty for long. It becomes a space defined by opportunity, waiting for any lineage capable of rising into it. In the early Paleocene, that space stretched across every continent. The role of dominant land predator, once held by immense reptilian forms, stood open. The creatures that moved beneath it had not yet reached the size or speed required to claim it. For a time, the position existed without an occupant. The first to step into that vacancy were not mammals. They were birds, descendants of a lineage that had already endured profound change, carrying forward the structure of their ancestry in altered form. Flight was no longer their defining feature in these new roles. Instead, their bodies shifted toward height, weight, and force, adapting to a life grounded in pursuit and control. Among them, Gastornis emerged within the forests of what are now Europe and North America. It stood close to 2 meters tall, its frame supported by strong, column-like legs. Its skull, broad and heavy, extended forward with a beak capable of generating immense pressure. This was not a creature of flight. Its wings had reduced to balanced structures, while its body committed entirely to a terrestrial existence. For several million years, across wide regions of the northern hemisphere, such birds occupied the highest predatory roles available. Their presence shaped the behavior of smaller animals, including early mammals, which remained within sizes that kept them vulnerable. The dynamic of pursuit and avoidance persisted, but the participants had changed. In South America, separated by vast stretches of ocean, a different lineage of flightless birds evolved along a similar path. The forest racids, often referred to as terror birds, developed independently yet arrived at a comparable form. Long legs supported bodies built for speed, while their heads carried elongated beaks designed for impact and control. Among these, Kelenken guillermois reached a scale that exceeded most other terrestrial predators of its time. Standing approximately 3 meters tall, it bore a skull measuring 71 centimeters in length, a structure that dominated its profile. Its design suggests a method of hunting based on forceful strikes, delivering repeated blows that subdued prey through momentum and precision. On another isolated landmass, Australia, a separate group of large birds followed a different evolutionary route while still reaching similar outcomes in size and dominance. Dromornis sturtoni, often called the demon duck of doom, grew to nearly 3 meters in height and weighed around 650 kilograms. Though related to waterfowl, its body reflected a transformation toward ground-based life, with mass and strength replacing any reliance on flight. These lineages did not share immediate ancestry in their predatory forms, yet they converged upon similar solutions. Height provided visibility across open terrain. Powerful legs enabled rapid movement. And large skulls and beaks delivered force sufficient to control prey. The pattern reveals something consistent beneath the variation. When a role becomes available, evolution explores multiple paths toward occupying it, each shaped by the materials already present within a lineage. For a span of millions of years, birds held these positions across different continents, maintaining dominance in a world still adjusting to its new structure. Mammals, though increasing in size and diversity, had not yet reached the point where they could consistently challenge these avian predators. The transition would come gradually, as body sizes continued to rise and new forms of locomotion and strategy emerged. Until then, the highest positions on land remained in the grasp of creatures that, in another age, had taken to the sky. They had returned to the ground, not as remnants of the past, but as the first to claim what had been left behind. Predation returned to land in unfamiliar forms, shaped by lineages that had never held such roles before. As mammals expanded in size and range, the pressure to hunt, to pursue, and to control other animals began to take form within bodies that had once been limited to smaller, quieter lives. The results were not the sleek hunters seen today, but a series of early attempts, each exploring what it meant to become a predator. One of the earliest of these attempts appeared in the mesonychids. They carried the outward shape of pursuit, long limbs built for covering ground, heads angled forward, senses directed toward movement. Yet their ancestry lay among hoofed mammals, not among the carnivores familiar today. Their feet ended in hooves, and their teeth were designed less for slicing flesh than for crushing it. Their bodies suggest a form caught between identities, combining traits that did not fully align with the demands of hunting. Though they spread across parts of the northern hemisphere, their lineage did not continue beyond its own time. As these early predators occupied the landscape, another group emerged with greater size and influence. The creodonts developed into some of the most formidable hunters of their era, with certain species reaching masses comparable to modern bears. Their jaws carried specialized shearing teeth, positioned in ways that allowed efficient processing of flesh, though at the cost of flexibility. Unlike later carnivores, which balance multiple functions within their dentition, creodonts relied heavily on a single cutting mechanism, limiting their adaptability. For more than 40 million years, they dominated predatory roles across Africa, Europe, and Asia. Their persistence suggests a long period of stability, where their particular design matched the conditions of their environments. Yet even such extended success did not secure permanence. Gradually, their diversity declined, their range contracted, and eventually they vanished entirely. No living lineage traces directly back to them. The transition that followed did not introduce an immediately superior predator. Instead, it brought forward a different structure, one that would prove more adaptable over time. The early members of carnivora appeared alongside existing predator groups, small and not yet dominant. Their advantage lay in the arrangement of their teeth and jaws, allowing them to both slice and crush, shifting between feeding strategies as conditions required. This flexibility accumulated into resilience. Over generations, as environments shifted and prey varied, these animals adapted more readily than their competitors. The change was gradual, almost unnoticeable within short spans, yet it altered the balance. The earlier predator lineages, once widespread, gave way to these more versatile forms. Among the more enigmatic figures of this period stands Andrewsarchus, known from a single, massive skull discovered in Mongolia. Measuring approximately 83 centimeters in length, it suggests an animal of considerable size, possibly the largest land-based mammalian predator of its time. Its structure points not toward modern carnivores, but toward hoofed relatives connected to whales, echoing earlier patterns where predatory roles emerged from unexpected origins. Across continents, similar patterns unfolded. Predator forms appeared, adapted, and then disappeared, replaced by others that followed different paths. The process did not move toward a single outcome, but spread across multiple possibilities, each tested by changing conditions. The predators that remain today are part of this broader history, not its predetermined result. They are the continuation of one set of solutions among many that once existed. What is preserved in the present is only a fragment of what evolution explored, a narrow continuation shaped by both survival and loss. At the edge of an ancient shoreline, where fresh water met the warmth of a shallow sea, a small mammal moved between two worlds without fully belonging to either. Its steps were careful along the riverbank, its body shaped for land, its senses tuned to air and ground. Yet the water beside it held something new, a quiet abundance that began to pull its lineage in an unexpected direction. Around 53 million years ago, that animal lived in what is now part of Pakistan, along the margins of the Tethys Sea. It is known as Pakicetus. Its limbs ended in hooves, its body carried the proportions of a terrestrial runner, and its habits were tied to fresh water. At a glance, it could be mistaken for a long-snouted land predator, moving through a familiar landscape. The change that followed did not arrive all at once. It unfolded across generations, each one carrying slight differences that altered how the body interacted with water. Individuals that could move more easily through rivers gained access to new food sources. Those that spent more time submerged found less competition. The shift began as a preference, then became a pathway. From Pakicetus, forms emerged that bridged land and water in increasingly fluid ways. Ambulocetus followed, a creature capable of walking on land while also swimming with an undulating motion, its body flexing in ways that echoed later marine mammals. It occupied a transitional space, not yet committed to the sea, but no longer limited to the land. Soon after, Rhodocetus appeared, its limbs adapting further for aquatic life. The hind legs reduced in size, still present but no longer central to movement. The body lengthened, the spine becoming more flexible, allowing propulsion through water with greater efficiency. Time between visits to land likely shortened as the sea became the primary environment. By 40 million years ago, Dorudon represented a near completion of this transition. Its hind limbs had diminished to small internal structures, no longer visible externally, no longer functional for walking. Its body was fully adapted to life in water, with flippers replacing forelimbs and a streamlined shape guiding its movement. Then came Basilosaurus, extending this transformation to an extraordinary scale. Reaching lengths of around 18 meters, it moved entirely within the ocean, its elongated body undulating through water with a rhythm that bore little resemblance to its distant ancestors. The connection to land remained only in faint traces within its anatomy. The environment that guided this change offered consistent conditions. The shallow seas were warm, rich in fish, and largely free of competing predators during this early period. Access to this resource depended on the ability to move through water with increasing efficiency. Each improvement, no matter how slight, provided an advantage that accumulated over time. As bodies adapted, internal systems followed. The position of the nostrils shifted gradually along the skull, moving from the tip of the snout toward the top of the head. This change allowed breathing at the surface without fully exposing the body, eventually forming the structure known as the blowhole. Limbs transformed in response to resistance, with hind legs diminishing as they created drag, while front limbs flattened into paddles that aided in steering. Across approximately 15 million years, the entire structure of the body reorganized. Bone, muscle, and behavior shifted in coordination, guided by the demands of a new environment. From this sequence emerged the lineage that would later produce the blue whale, an animal reaching lengths of around 30 meters and masses approaching 180,000 kilograms. Its existence traces back through these transformations to a small land mammal that once relied on rivers for survival. The path from shore to open ocean did not follow intention or design. It unfolded through incremental change, each step shaped by interaction with a world that offered new possibilities just beyond the edge of land. Above the dim outlines of early forests, a different kind of space remained largely untouched. It was not empty in the absolute sense, but it lacked a dominant presence, a lineage committed to moving through darkness with control and precision. In that quiet vertical expanse, a vast supply of life drifted in constant motion. Flying insects had filled the air for hundreds of millions of years, forming a continuous layer of movement above vegetation. They traced invisible paths through the night, feeding, reproducing, and dispersing across wide regions. This resource existed independently of the changes on land, persistent and abundant, yet only lightly exploited by vertebrate life after earlier aerial forms had vanished. Into this space, another lineage began to move. Around 52 million years ago, bats appear in the fossil record with a completeness that offers little indication of how they arrived. Their wings are already formed, their skeletal structures reshaped for powered flight, their proportions aligned with a life spent in the air. There is no gradual sequence of intermediate forms preserved, no extended trail showing the slow transformation from ground to sky. The earliest known species, Onychonycterus finii, retains features that hint at a more complex origin. Claws are present on all 5 digits, suggesting an ability to climb or grasp surfaces, perhaps moving along tree trunks or branches. Yet the membranes that extend between its elongated fingers show that it could already sustain flight. The balance between these traits suggests a transitional phase, though the earlier steps remain largely unrecorded. This absence forms one of the more persistent gaps in paleontology. The shift from terrestrial movement to powered flight requires coordinated changes across the entire body, including bone structure, musculature, and sensory systems. Yet the evidence capturing these stages is limited, leaving much of the transformation inferred rather than directly observed. Flight alone does not fully explain the success of bats. Movement through darkness requires a different form of perception, one that does not depend on light. Within this lineage, echolocation emerged, allowing individuals to emit high-frequency sounds and interpret the returning echoes. Through this process, the surrounding environment becomes a detailed map constructed from sound rather than sight. The precision of this system is remarkable. A bat in complete darkness can detect objects less than a millimeter thick while moving at speed, adjusting its path in real time. This ability transforms the night from a barrier into a navigable space, one where obstacles and prey can be located without visual cues. Whether echolocation developed before flight or followed it remains uncertain. Both possibilities suggest different pathways, yet each leads to the same outcome: a creature capable of sustained aerial movement in darkness, guided by a sensory system unlike any other among mammals. As bats diversified, their roles expanded across ecosystems. Some specialized in consuming insects, regulating populations that would otherwise grow unchecked. Others adapted to feeding on fruit or nectar, carrying pollen between plants and dispersing seeds across wide distances. Their presence became woven into the functioning of forests and other habitats, linking plant reproduction with animal movement. Today, bats account for more than 1,400 species, representing roughly 20% of all mammal diversity. Their forms vary widely, from small insect hunters to larger fruit eaters, each adapted to specific ecological roles. Yet the origin of this entire lineage remains only partially visible. The transformation from ground to air, from reliance on sight to navigation through sound, unfolded in ways that left limited traces. It stands as a reminder that even within a detailed record, some transitions remain quiet, their full sequence hidden within gaps that time has not preserved. Far from the shifting connections of other continents, one landmass drifted through time in prolonged separation. South America moved as an island world, bordered by wide ocean distances that limited exchange with neighboring regions. For tens of millions of years, this isolation shaped a biological landscape that unfolded along its own path, guided by conditions that differed from those elsewhere. In the early stages of this separation, the continent carried a collection of mammals that would develop in relative independence. Without the steady arrival of competing lineages from the north, these animals expanded into roles that, on other continents, were already occupied by very different forms. The result was a set of evolutionary outcomes that appear both familiar and unfamiliar, echoing shapes seen elsewhere while arising from entirely separate origins. Among these animals, Macrauchenia moved across open environments on three-toed limbs, its body supported by a structure that suggested speed and endurance. Its elongated snout, flexible and mobile, gave it access to vegetation beyond the reach of shorter-faced grazers. Though its outline might recall camels or horses, its ancestry followed a distinct lineage found only within this continent. Nearby, Toxodon grazed with a form that combined features not easily compared to any single modern group. Its body was heavy and rounded, supported by sturdy limbs, its head broad with teeth suited for processing tough plant material. When fragments of its remains were first uncovered in the 19th century, they resisted immediate classification, reflecting how far its lineage had diverged from more familiar patterns. Other species followed similar paths of convergence without connection. Pyretherium developed a body shape and scale that resembled early elephants, with massive limbs and a structure suited for supporting considerable weight. Yet this similarity arose independently, a response to similar environmental pressures rather than shared ancestry. Astropitherium, carrying tusks and possibly a short trunk, added another variation to this pattern, its lineage existing only within this isolated system before disappearing entirely. Predation within this environment took on its own distinct form. In the absence of placental carnivores that dominated other continents, South America's apex roles were filled by birds and marsupial predators. The forest racids, already established as large, flightless hunters, continued to shape ecosystems with their speed and striking force. Alongside them, Megatherian carnivores such as Thylacosmolus evolved, developing elongated canine teeth that closely resembled those of saber-toothed predators found elsewhere, despite having no direct connection. This repeated emergence of similar forms from different starting points reflects a consistent pattern where environmental conditions guide the development of comparable solutions, even among unrelated lineages. The continent functioned as a contained system where these processes unfolded without external interruption. Even within smaller mammals, scale expanded in unexpected ways. Joseph Ortigasia monesi reached a size estimated at over 1,000 kilograms, a rodent whose mass approached that of large grazing animals. Its existence illustrates how isolation can allow even familiar groups to explore forms that would be constrained under different competitive conditions. For nearly 60 million years, this independent development continued. The ecosystems of South America remained distinct, populated by species that had no equivalents elsewhere. The continent became a living record of what evolution could produce when allowed to proceed without outside influence. That isolation ended when the Isthmus of Panama formed approximately 3 million years ago, connecting South America to North America. With this new land bridge, species from the north moved southward, carrying with them lineages shaped by longer periods of competition across larger, connected landscapes. The encounter altered the balance. Many of the unique South American forms declined and disappeared, unable to compete with the incoming species. The long period of independent evolution came to a close, leaving behind a record of what had once existed within that isolated world. Carried slowly across the southern oceans, a continent moved away from its ancient connections and did not return. Australia separated from Gondwana with a small and specific set of mammals, most of them marsupials, and then remained apart long enough for those animals to define an entire system on their own. With no steady arrival of placental competitors, their lineage expanded outward into roles that, elsewhere, were filled by entirely different groups. Across plains, forests, and dry interior regions, marsupials diversified into forms that mirrored the structure of ecosystems found on other continents, yet without sharing the same ancestry. There were grazers that moved across open ground, browsers that fed from shrubs and trees, burrowers that reshaped soil, gliders that crossed between branches, and insectivores that traced the smaller movements of life. Predation, too, emerged within this framework, carried by species that developed the speed, strength, and dentition required to hunt. Among the largest of these animals was Diprotodon optatum, a marsupial whose size approached that of a hippopotamus. It weighed around 2,800 kilograms and moved across the landscape as a dominant herbivore, shaping vegetation through its feeding. Its presence reflects how scale could expand within this isolated system, producing large-bodied animals that occupied roles similar to those found elsewhere, though arising from a different lineage. Alongside it, Procoptodon goliath represented another variation in form and behavior. This giant kangaroo stood close to 3 meters tall, supported by powerful hind limbs that enabled movement across open terrain. Its forelimbs, shorter but strong, allowed it to grasp and pull down branches, accessing food beyond the reach of smaller animals. Its forward-facing eyes suggest a capacity for depth perception, aiding in precise movement and interaction with its environment. Predation within this system reached a notable expression in Thylacoleo carnifex, often referred to as the marsupial lion. Its body combined strength and compactness, with jaws capable of delivering a bite force relative to its size that exceeds that of any known mammal. Its teeth did not follow the pattern seen in placental carnivores. Instead of elongated canines, it possessed enlarged premolars shaped for slicing, functioning as blades rather than piercing structures. Another predator, the thylacine, developed a form that closely resembled that of a wolf. Its body proportions, skull shape, and overall silhouette created a convergence so precise that early observers assumed a direct relationship. In reality, the two lineages shared only a distant common ancestry, separated by hundreds of millions of years. The similarity arose from similar ecological pressures, guiding unrelated animals toward comparable solutions. This parallel development extended across the entire continent. Each role within the ecosystem was filled, not by the same lineages found elsewhere, but by marsupials that had adapted to meet the same challenges. The result was a complete and functioning world, built from a different starting point, yet arriving at structures that echoed those seen in other regions. The long isolation of Australia allowed these forms to persist without interruption for millions of years. The balance remained stable until new connections introduced external pressures. The arrival of dingoes, brought by humans, altered predatory dynamics, contributing to the disappearance of the thylacine from mainland Australia around 2,000 years ago. The last known individual lived in captivity in Tasmania, dying in 1936. This history reveals that what appears common or expected in one context is not universal. The roles within ecosystems can be filled by many different forms, depending on the paths available to those that evolve within them. Australia stands as a record of that possibility, a continent where a single lineage expanded into a complete system, demonstrating that the outcomes of evolution are not fixed, but shaped by the conditions in which they unfold. Heat can rise without fire, building slowly until it reshapes an entire planet. Around 56 million years ago, long after the initial recovery had begun, the Earth entered a period where warmth intensified beyond its previous limits, not through impact or collision, but through changes within its own systems. The shift unfolded over a span of roughly 20,000 to 50,000 years, a brief interval when measured against geological time. During this period, global temperatures increased by approximately 5 to 8 degrees Celsius above an already warm baseline. The change was not uniform in its effects, yet its reach extended across land and ocean, altering climates in ways that left lasting traces. This event is known as the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, or PETM. It is associated with a rapid release of carbon into the atmosphere, likely driven by volcanic activity that disturbed methane deposits stored beneath the seafloor. As methane entered the atmosphere and transformed into carbon dioxide, it amplified the greenhouse effect, trapping heat and raising temperatures across the planet. At its peak, the transformation was evident even in regions that today are defined by cold. The surface waters of the Arctic Ocean reached temperatures near 23 degrees Celsius, conditions comparable to modern temperate seas. Vegetation associated with warm climates extended into these high latitudes, with plant forms typically found in tropical environments appearing far beyond their usual range. There was no permanent ice at the poles, and the gradient between equator and pole diminished. In equatorial regions, ocean temperatures approached 36 degrees Celsius, nearing the upper limits tolerated by many marine organisms. These conditions imposed constraints on life adapted to narrower thermal ranges, while simultaneously expanding opportunities for species capable of enduring or exploiting higher temperatures. The result was a broad expansion of tropical and subtropical environments. Habitats associated with warmth spread across continents, connecting regions that had previously been separated by climatic boundaries. This expansion allowed species adapted to such conditions to extend their ranges, occupying areas that had once been inaccessible. Within mammalian lineages, a distinct pattern emerged in response to this change. Body sizes decreased across multiple groups, a process known as dwarfing. Smaller bodies dissipate heat more effectively, reducing the strain imposed by elevated temperatures. This shift occurred independently in different lineages, suggesting a consistent response to the same environmental pressure. The change unfolded rapidly within a few thousand years, marking one of the more immediate evolutionary adjustments observed in the fossil record. As temperatures eventually declined, the pattern reversed. Body sizes increased again, returning toward previous ranges, as cooler conditions allowed larger forms to persist without the same thermal constraints. This oscillation highlights the sensitivity of biological systems to changes in climate, where even modest shifts in temperature can influence physical form across entire groups. The PETM stands as a moment where the balance between atmosphere, ocean, and life shifted in concert. It was not driven by a single visible event, but by a cascade of changes that amplified one another, producing a global transformation. The recovery from this period extended over approximately 200,000 years, as carbon levels gradually decreased and temperatures stabilized. During that time, ecosystems adjusted, species redistributed, and new patterns of life emerged within the altered climate. This interval remains one of the closest parallels to modern changes in atmospheric carbon, offering a record of how rapidly conditions can shift when the balance of the system is disturbed, and how life responds within the boundaries set by temperature and time. High above the ground, where branches overlap and light filters through layered leaves, a different kind of space formed, one defined not by distance across land, but by depth within it. Movement here required precision rather than speed, and survival depended on navigating a world that extended in 3 dimensions rather than one. It was within this elevated network that the earliest primates appear, emerging near the boundary between the Paleocene and Eocene, during a time when warming climates supported the spread of dense forests. These animals were small, their bodies adapted to life among branches, where every step demanded accuracy and every landing required control. Their hands differed from those of many other mammals. Instead of claws suited for digging or gripping rough surfaces, they carried flattened nails and flexible digits capable of wrapping around branches. This allowed them to hold rather than hook, creating a stable connection with the structures they moved across. Their eyes faced forward, aligned to produce overlapping fields of vision. This arrangement provided depth perception, enabling them to judge distances between branches with a level of precision that reduced the risk of falling. Their brains, slightly larger relative to their body size than those of many contemporaries, supported the coordination required for this mode of life. Each movement through the canopy involved constant adjustment, integrating visual information with balance and timing. The environment itself selected for these traits, not through sudden change, but through the steady filtering of individuals less suited to its demands. The expansion of flowering plants during this period transformed forests into complex systems rich in resources. Fruits, flowers, and the insects that fed upon them created a layered food web suspended above the ground. Accessing this abundance required the ability to move confidently through branches, to reach, grasp, and balance in a space where miscalculation carried immediate consequence. Animals that could judge distances accurately gained access to food that others could not reach. Those that could grasp securely maintained stability while feeding. Over generations, these traits became more pronounced, refining a body plan that aligned closely with the structure of the forest itself. As warm conditions extended across higher latitudes, these forest systems spread into regions that are now temperate. Early primates followed this expansion, dispersing into Europe and North America, occupying habitats far from their earlier range. For a time, their lineage extended across much of the northern hemisphere, moving through continuous stretches of forest. When temperatures later declined, these forests contracted. The environments that had supported primate populations in these regions receded, fragmenting into smaller areas and eventually disappearing. Without the conditions that had sustained them, these populations declined and vanished, leaving only those in regions where forests persisted. Africa and parts of Asia became the remaining centers of primate evolution. Within these areas, isolated groups continued to adapt, their environments shaping new variations in form and behavior. Around 25 million years ago, one such lineage began to diverge further, giving rise to early apes. These animals exhibited larger bodies, increased brain size, and the loss of a tail, along with changes in social structure that reflected more complex interactions. Living within groups introduced new challenges. Individuals needed to track relationships, recognize others, and respond to shifting social dynamics. These demands placed additional pressure on cognitive capacity, encouraging further development of the brain. Over time, this progression led to forms capable of processing information in increasingly complex ways. The path from small, tree-dwelling mammals to later primates was not direct or predetermined, but shaped by the structure of forests and the interactions within them. Within that layered environment, movement and perception became intertwined, and from that connection, a lineage emerged that would eventually carry the ability to reflect on its own origins, tracing its history through the patterns left behind in stone. Across distant continents, separated by oceans and time, similar shapes began to appear without any shared origin. Forms emerged that seemed familiar even when their ancestry traced back through entirely different paths. The repetition was not exact, but it was close enough to suggest that certain solutions arise whenever similar challenges are encountered. This pattern is known as convergent evolution, a process where unrelated lineages develop comparable traits because they occupy similar ecological roles. It is not guided by intention, but by constraint. The physical world presents a limited set of problems, and within those limits, only certain configurations consistently succeed. One of the clearest examples appears in the development of saber-toothed predators. Across multiple lineages, animals evolved elongated upper canines designed for delivering precise, powerful bites. These teeth required adjustments throughout the body. The lower jaw became restricted in its range of motion to accommodate the extended canines, while the neck and forelimbs strengthened to control struggling prey. This configuration arose independently in true felids such as Smilodon, in marsupial predators like Thylacosmolus, in creodonts such as macaroids, and in nimravids, a separate lineage of cat-like carnivores. Each lineage followed its own evolutionary path, yet arrived at a similar structural solution. A comparable pattern appears in pursuit predators, built for endurance and cooperation. The wolf-like body plan, defined by long limbs, a deep chest, and a form suited for sustained running, emerged in true wolves as well as in the thylacine and other extinct groups. These animals developed similar proportions because the demands of chasing prey over distance favor certain arrangements of muscle and bone. In aquatic environments, the repetition becomes even more pronounced. Mammals that return to the water from land evolved streamlined bodies with flippers and reduced limbs, minimizing resistance and improving propulsion. This transformation occurred in whales, in sea cows, and in pinnipeds such as seals and sea lions. Each lineage began with different ancestral structures, yet converged on overlapping forms shaped by the physics of moving through water. Sensory systems followed similar patterns. Echolocation, the ability to navigate and detect objects using reflected sound, developed independently in bats and in toothed whales. It also appears in certain birds and small mammals like shrews. Despite differences in anatomy, each system operates on the same principle, translating sound into spatial awareness with remarkable precision. Even among birds, large flightless predators evolved multiple times across different continents. These animals developed long legs for speed, strong bodies for stability, and heads equipped for delivering forceful strikes. Though their lineages were separate, the outcome aligned closely with the requirements of terrestrial hunting. These recurring forms suggest that evolution operates within a framework shaped by physical laws and ecological constraints. It does not produce unlimited variation in all directions. Instead, it explores a range of possibilities bounded by what is structurally viable and functionally effective. When a particular problem arises, whether it involves capturing prey, moving through water, or navigating in darkness, the number of successful solutions is limited. Different lineages, given enough time and similar pressures, tend to arrive at these solutions independently. The repetition is not exact, and each instance carries its own variations, influenced by the starting conditions of the lineage. Yet the underlying patterns remain consistent, revealing a deeper structure to the way life adapts. What appears at first as coincidence resolves into a pattern shaped by necessity. Across millions of years, in environments separated by distance and history, life returns again and again to the same designs, not because it intends to, but because those designs work. Beneath the surface, where light fades and pressure rises, the changes were just as complete. The event that reshaped the land did not stop at the shoreline. It reached into the oceans, altering systems that had developed over hundreds of millions of years. Before this transformation, marine ecosystems were structured around large reptilian predators and long-established invertebrate groups. Mosasaurs moved through open waters as dominant hunters, their bodies streamlined for speed and control. Plesiosaurs occupied a different form of movement, using 4 powerful flippers to navigate with a motion unlike anything seen today. Alongside them, ammonites drifted and swam in vast numbers, their coiled shells marking a lineage that had persisted for 350 million years. These forms did not continue. Their absence left a gap that extended across every level of the marine environment. The disappearance of such long-standing groups removed not only individual species, but entire ways of living within the ocean. What followed was not a simple return to previous conditions. The marine world reorganized around new components, building systems that differed fundamentally from those that had come before. Sharks, among the few large predators to persist through the transition, began to expand into roles left vacant. Their lineage had endured multiple extinction events, carrying with it a resilience that allowed survival under shifting conditions. Even so, their diversity had been reduced, and recovery unfolded over extended periods. As ecosystems stabilized, they reoccupied positions as major predators, adapting to the changing structure of marine life. At the same time, bony fish, known as teleosts, underwent a rapid and extensive diversification. These fish, which now represent the majority of species in modern oceans, expanded into a wide range of forms and functions. Their adaptability allowed them to fill numerous ecological roles, from small, fast-moving species that formed large schools to larger forms capable of occupying higher positions within the food web. During the Paleocene and Eocene, many of the foundational body plans seen in modern fish families took shape. These designs, refined through variation and selection, established the framework for the diversity present today. The ocean, once dominated by reptiles, became increasingly defined by fish and the interactions between them. As time progressed, another group entered this evolving system. Mammals that had transitioned into fully aquatic life began to grow in size and complexity. Their presence introduced a new form of predation, characterized by advanced sensory systems and coordinated behavior. These marine mammals did not simply replace earlier predators, but added a different layer of interaction, influencing the distribution and behavior of other species. The increasing abundance of large marine mammals provided a new source of energy within the system, one that supported the evolution of predators capable of exploiting it. Around 23 million years ago, Otodus megalodon emerged, reaching lengths estimated between 15 and 20 meters. Its size and structure suggest an adaptation to prey that had itself grown larger, reflecting a dynamic where predator and prey influenced each other's development. Over time, the ocean settled into a structure that, while stable, bore little resemblance to what had existed before the extinction. The foundational elements of modern marine ecosystems, from microscopic phytoplankton at the base to large predators at the top, assembled through a process shaped by loss and renewal. The systems now present in the ocean are not continuations of ancient arrangements, but new configurations, formed from the remnants of what had been removed and the possibilities that followed. A quiet shift began not with animals, but with something far smaller, rooted low against the ground, wading through ages of shadow. For most of its early history, this lineage remained confined beneath taller growth, occupying spaces where light filtered in thin fragments. Then the climate altered its rhythm, cooling slowly, seasons sharpening, and vast regions that once held dense vegetation began to open. In these expanding clearings, grasses moved outward with unusual speed. Their structure favored persistence rather than height, forming wide, continuous carpets that spread across valleys and plains. Where trees required years to establish, grasses advanced in seasons, taking advantage of exposed soil and shifting weather. The land gradually transformed, not through sudden replacement, but through steady occupation. Their success came from a set of traits that acted together with quiet precision. Within their tissues, microscopic silica particles formed rigid inclusions, creating a surface that resisted consumption. Any animal feeding on these plants encountered constant abrasion, a slow wearing that accumulated with each bite. Over time, this contact reduced the efficiency of teeth, shortening the period during which feeding could remain effective. At the same time, grasses grew in a manner unlike most other plants. Their vital tissues remained at the base, protected close to the ground. When the upper portions were removed, whether by grazing or by fire, new growth emerged from below. This allowed them to endure repeated disturbance without loss of vitality. Where other plants declined under pressure, grasses responded by returning, often more densely than before. As these landscapes expanded, they altered the conditions under which animals lived. Food sources shifted from varied leaves and soft growth to a more uniform but abrasive resource. Those able to process it gained access to a nearly continuous supply. Those that could not found themselves restricted to shrinking areas where older vegetation persisted. Across multiple lineages, a gradual transformation began. Teeth changed first, responding to the new demands of constant wear. High-crowned structures developed, extending deeper into the jaw and allowing continued use even as surfaces eroded. These teeth, known as hypsodont, provided a longer functional lifespan, maintaining feeding ability in environments dominated by abrasive plants. Limbs followed, adapting to open terrain. Longer legs allowed efficient movement across wide distances, while the reduction of toes improved stability and speed on firm ground. Bodies shifted toward forms suited for sustained travel, reflecting the need to move between grazing areas that stretched far beyond the limits of earlier habitats. The history of horses traces this progression with particular clarity. Early forms were small, with multiple toes and teeth suited to softer vegetation. Over millions of years, each generation carried subtle changes: longer limbs, fewer toes, and teeth built for endurance rather than delicacy. The sequence reflects a continuous dialogue between organism and environment, each adjustment shaped by the conditions imposed by expanding grasslands. Fire also became part of this system, moving across dry regions and clearing accumulated growth. Grasses, with their protected bases, returned quickly after each burn, while other plants often did not. This cycle reinforced their dominance, maintaining open landscapes where trees struggled to regain ground. In time, these environments came to cover a vast portion of the planet's land surface, forming ecosystems defined by motion, exposure, and continuity. The spread of grass did not simply introduce a new plant, it reorganized the relationships between soil, climate, and living forms. What began as a subtle presence beneath older growth reshaped the surface of the earth, guiding the evolution of animals and altering the structure of entire ecosystems. The transformation unfolded gradually, yet its effects reached across continents, carried forward in every step taken across open ground. A gradual dimming of warmth settled over the planet, not as a sudden shift, but as a long exhale that stretched across millions of years. The high, humid conditions of earlier epochs receded, replaced by a climate that grew more restrained, more variable, more defined by contrast. Seasons deepened, and the poles, once mild, began to change in character. Far to the south, a transformation unfolded with quiet finality. Ice gathered on a continent that had not held it for immense spans of time, spreading outward until it became permanent. This moment, known as the Eocene-Oligocene transition, marked the beginning of a new planetary state. The cause lay not in the sky, but in the shifting of continents as a passage opened between Antarctica and South America. Through this gap, a current formed, circling the southern pole without interruption, isolating those waters from warmer regions and allowing cold to accumulate without relief. The presence of ice altered more than temperature. It changed the balance of the oceans, drawing water into frozen reservoirs and subtly lowering global sea levels. Winds adjusted, currents reorganized, and climates across distant continents responded to this new configuration. The Earth began to operate under a different set of constraints, where cold was no longer temporary, but a defining force. As time moved forward, this cooling deepened into a rhythm. By the beginning of the Pleistocene, around 2.6 million years ago, the northern hemisphere entered a cycle that would repeat again and again. Vast ice sheets advanced from polar regions, covering large portions of land, then retreated, only to return once more. These cycles were guided by small variations in the planet's orbit, changes in tilt and distance that altered how sunlight was distributed across the surface. Each cycle unfolded over tens of thousands of years, a slow expansion of ice, followed by an equally gradual withdrawal. During glacial periods, water became locked within ice sheets, lowering sea levels and exposing land that had long been submerged. Continents expanded, coastlines shifted, and habitats fragmented into isolated pockets. Populations found themselves separated by barriers of cold, distance, or changing terrain. In these isolated refugia, life continued, shaped by local conditions and limited resources. Over generations, differences accumulated. Traits that suited one region diverged from those of another, guided by the specific demands of each environment. When the ice receded and pathways reopened, these populations met again. Some merged, blending their variations. Others remained distinct, no longer compatible. In some cases, competition followed, with one lineage replacing another. This repeated pattern of separation and reunion acted as a steady force of transformation. It compressed diversity into smaller spaces, then released it outward again, allowing new forms to emerge with each cycle. Extinction and creation move together, not as abrupt events, but as parts of a continuous process driven by the shifting edge of ice. The animals that came to inhabit this world reflected its demands. Large bodies retained heat more efficiently, thick coverings provided insulation, and behaviors adapted to seasonal extremes. Creatures such as woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, cave lions, and giant ground sloths were shaped by these conditions, each carrying features refined by countless generations under fluctuating climates. Their environment bore little resemblance to the present arrangement of ecosystems. It was a landscape defined by movement, by advancing cold and retreating warmth, by open expanses that appeared and vanished with the cycles. The planet itself had become dynamic in a new way, its surface continually rearranged by the slow pulse of ice. There came a time when the land itself seemed to carry weight in motion, when the presence of animals altered the silence of entire regions simply by existing within them. Across open plains, cold steppes, and scattered woodlands, life reached a scale that echoed an older grandeur, though shaped by entirely different forces. This was not a return to what had been, but a culmination of everything that had followed. Among these forms, the woolly mammoth moved with a deliberate steadiness, its body built for endurance in climates defined by long winters. Layers of fat beneath the skin stored energy and preserved heat, while a dense undercoat trapped warmth close to the body. Above it, coarse hair formed a protective barrier against wind and drifting snow. Its tusks, long and curved, were not ornaments but tools, sweeping aside frozen layers to uncover vegetation hidden beneath. Elsewhere, on the colder margins of Eurasia, another presence took shape, massive and singular. Elasmotherium, sometimes called the Siberian unicorn, carried a structure unlike any other grazing animal, a single horn rising from its skull, extending forward with formidable length. Its body was heavy, its movement grounded, adapted to landscapes where survival depended on steady access to sparse resources. In the Americas, Megatherium stood as a different expression of scale. This giant ground sloth moved with a slow, controlled strength, capable of rising upright to reach vegetation beyond the grasp of other herbivores. Its claws, immense and curved, required a distinctive posture, its weight balanced in a way that preserved their function. The form it carried was unusual, yet entirely suited to the role it occupied. Predators also reflected this era's intensity. Arctodus, the short-faced bear, possessed a height and reach that allowed it to dominate through presence alone. Its long limbs suggested movement across large distances, an animal capable of covering ground with efficiency, navigating vast territories shaped by shifting climates. Across parts of Europe, Megaloceros moved through open spaces, its antlers extending outward in wide arcs that defined its silhouette. These structures, among the largest ever carried by a deer, required constant adjustment, influencing how the animal moved through its environment. Their size reflected a balance between display and function, shaped by pressures that extended beyond simple survival. In forested regions of Asia, Gigantopithecus occupied a different niche, its size surpassing that of any other primate known. Its existence was tied to dense vegetation, where food sources required strength and persistence to obtain. Though its remains are fragmentary, the scale of its body suggests a presence that would have altered the structure of the forests it inhabited. These animals lived not in isolation, but within interconnected systems that had developed over countless cycles of change. Their forms were not experiments in excess, but precise responses to conditions that favored size, endurance, and specialization. Each carried adaptations refined over millions of years, representing the outcome of a long and continuous process. Their time was not distant in the way earlier ages were. Some of these creatures existed alongside early human populations, sharing landscapes that would later be transformed. On a remote island in the Arctic, small populations of mammoths persisted long after their mainland relatives had vanished, surviving into a period when human civilizations had already begun to leave enduring marks on the land. The world they inhabited was one of contrasts, shaped by cold, movement, and scale. It held a richness that stood as a final expression of large life before another transition, quieter at first, began to unfold. The change did not arrive with a single event, nor with any visible boundary in stone. It unfolded unevenly across continents, a quiet subtraction that gathered momentum over thousands of years until entire lineages were gone. Where vast animals had once shaped the land through their movement and feeding, absence began to take hold, leaving patterns that no longer repeated. Across North America, this thinning became especially stark. Mammoths and mastodons disappeared, followed by horses and camels that had once moved across open terrain in large numbers. Giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, short-faced bears, and American lions all vanished within a span that, in geological terms, was brief. The scale of loss was not scattered, but concentrated, affecting nearly all large species within a narrow window of time. A similar pattern emerged farther south. In South America, a majority of large animal genera declined and disappeared, ending lineages that had evolved in isolation for millions of years. In Australia, the process occurred earlier, with most large species gone by around 46,000 years ago. Each continent showed its own timing, yet the structure of the change remained consistent, a rapid reduction focused on animals of substantial size. Europe and Asia also experienced this contraction. Woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, cave lions, cave hyenas, and giant deer all vanished, leaving ecosystems reorganized around smaller forms. The landscapes did not become empty, but they lost a dimension that had once defined them, a presence carried by animals capable of altering vegetation, soil, and the movement of other species. Amid this widespread decline, one region stood apart. In Africa, many large animals persisted: elephants, rhinoceroses, hippos, giraffes, and lions, continuing into the present. This difference suggests a longer history of coexistence between these species and a particular kind of predator that had become increasingly effective. Over extended periods, behaviors that reduced vulnerability could be reinforced, allowing survival where similar species elsewhere did not endure. Beyond the continents, islands provide a clearer pattern. In isolated environments such as Madagascar, New Zealand, and various island chains, the arrival of a new presence was followed by the disappearance of large native animals. These events occurred repeatedly, each instance reflecting the same sequence: introduction followed by rapid loss. Climate shifts formed part of this period as the world moved out of glacial conditions into a warmer phase. Yet similar transitions had occurred before without producing comparable outcomes. Ice had advanced and retreated many times, reshaping habitats and influencing distribution, but it had not previously removed such a wide range of large species across multiple continents in such a concentrated interval. The emerging picture is one of convergence between factors, where environmental change intersected with a new ecological pressure. The timing aligns closely across regions, suggesting a common influence acting alongside existing climatic variation. The disappearance of these animals was not random, but selective, focused on size, on visibility, on the traits that had once provided advantage. What remained after this period was a world still rich with life, yet altered in proportion and structure. The great animals that had defined earlier landscapes no longer shaped them in the same way. Their absence marked the close of a long trajectory, one that had begun in the aftermath of a distant impact and unfolded across millions of years before narrowing rapidly near its end. Alongside the many endings, there exist lines that simply continue, passing through upheaval without altering their form in any obvious way. These survivors do not announce themselves through dominance or expansion, but through persistence, maintaining patterns that reach back into distant ages. In the waters off southern Africa, a fish once known only from stone appeared again in living form. The coelacanth, part of a lineage extending hundreds of millions of years into the past, had been assumed gone, its presence preserved only in fossil layers far older than the age of mammals. Yet it endured in deep marine environments, its body plan remaining remarkably consistent, shaped long ago and carried forward with little visible change. Elsewhere, along shallow coastal margins, horseshoe crabs continue their slow movements across sediment. Their structure, with a broad carapace and long tail spine, reflects a design that has persisted through multiple global disruptions. They have existed through periods that erased countless other forms, their way of life anchored to environments that shifted less dramatically than those on land. In deeper waters of the Pacific, the nautilus drifts with quiet regularity. Its coiled shell, divided into chambers, maintains buoyancy with subtle control, allowing it to rise and fall within the ocean's depths. This form, present for immense spans of time, has required little modification, suggesting a balance achieved early and maintained across changing eras. On isolated islands, the tuatara remains as a singular representative of a once widespread group. Its appearance carries features that recall a distant past. Its lineage now reduced to a few populations in restricted habitats. There, in relative isolation, it persists without the pressures that transformed or eliminated its relatives elsewhere. In the cold waters of the North Atlantic, the Greenland shark moves slowly through darkness, its lifespan extending across centuries. Individuals alive today may have begun their lives in periods that, for humans, belong to distant history. Its pace is unhurried, its metabolism low, its existence tied to an environment where change occurs at a reduced rate. These organisms share a set of underlying conditions that have allowed their continuity. They inhabit places where environmental variation is limited, where extremes are softened by depth, isolation, or temperature. Their metabolic demands are modest, reducing the need for rapid adaptation. Their diets are flexible enough to endure shifts in available resources, yet stable enough to avoid reliance on any single source. Equally important is the absence of persistent pressure from competitors or predators capable of forcing change. In many cases, these species occupy niches that remain relatively unchallenged, allowing their established forms to persist without the need for innovation. Evolution, in such contexts, does not cease, but it proceeds with subtlety, refining rather than reshaping. Their presence challenges the idea that survival is always linked to transformation. While many lineages adapted rapidly to new conditions, others found equilibrium early and remained within it. These forms are not incomplete or outdated, but finely tuned to circumstances that have endured. Across the long arc of life, they stand as reminders that change is not the only path. Stability, when matched precisely to environment, can extend across vast spans of time, carrying a design forward through events that reshape nearly everything else. Time, when viewed across the long arc of life, often appears stretched beyond measure, as if change must always proceed with quiet patience across uncountable ages. Yet, within this vastness, there are moments when transformation gathers pace, compressing what seems immeasurable into intervals that can be traced within a single lifetime. After the great disruptions that reshaped the world, life did not simply recover. It responded with a speed that left clear marks in the record. Forms shifted, bodies altered, behaviors adapted, all within spans far shorter than earlier assumptions had allowed. What had once been considered a gradual drift revealed itself, under certain conditions, as something far more responsive. This pattern is not confined to distant epochs. It can be observed directly in living populations. On a small island in the Adriatic, a group of Italian wall lizards, introduced in the early 1970s, encountered a different environment, one where plant material became a significant part of their diet. Within a few decades, their bodies reflected this change. Their heads broadened, their bite force increased, and structures within their digestive system adapted to process tougher food. These differences emerged within roughly 37 generations, a span that, in human terms, barely extends beyond a few decades. On another set of islands, in the Galapagos, a drought altered the availability of seeds, leaving only larger, harder forms. Within a single generation, the medium ground finch population shifted, individuals with slightly larger beaks gaining advantage and passing those traits forward. The change was measurable, not as a distant possibility, but as a direct response to immediate conditions. In freshwater streams of Trinidad, guppies moved between environments defined by different levels of predation. When transferred to areas with fewer predators, their appearance and behavior began to change within a few dozen generations. Colors became more pronounced, body size adjusted, and reproductive strategies shifted, all reflecting a new balance between survival and competition. At even smaller scales, change accelerates further. In controlled environments, bacteria exposed to antibiotics can develop resistance in a matter of days. Genetic variations that confer even slight survival benefits become dominant rapidly, demonstrating how selection can act with remarkable efficiency when pressures are intense and populations reproduce quickly. These examples reveal a consistent principle. Evolution is not bound to a single tempo. It responds to context, accelerating when conditions favor rapid change, slowing when environments remain stable. The underlying mechanisms remain the same: variation, selection, inheritance, yet the rate at which they operate can vary widely. When ecological space opens, when competition is reduced, and when new challenges arise, the pace of transformation increases. Small differences become significant, and over successive generations, these differences accumulate into distinct forms. The transition from one state to another can unfold with surprising speed, especially when pressures are strong and opportunities are abundant. Seen in this light, the emergence of entirely new ways of living within spans measured in millions of years becomes less a slow unfolding and more a sustained series of rapid adjustments. Each step builds upon the last, guided by immediate conditions, yet contributing to long-term change. The rhythm of life, then, is not fixed. It carries within it the capacity for both stillness and sudden movement, shaped by the circumstances through which it passes. Across distant branches of life, separated by oceans of time and anatomy, a quiet alignment began to take shape, not in form or movement, but in the invisible patterns of thought. It did not emerge in one place or along a single lineage. Instead, it appeared in parallel, as if drawn toward the same destination from entirely different beginnings. Between roughly 20 and 30 million years ago, several groups began to show a shared trend, an expansion of brain capacity paired with increasingly complex behavior. Among primates, neural growth accompanied lives spent navigating dense social networks. In the oceans, certain cetaceans developed large brains within bodies already adapted to fluid motion and long-distance travel. On land, elephants carried forward a different path, their immense size paired with a nervous system capable of subtle memory and recognition. In the air, corvids, with brains built on entirely different architecture, displayed abilities that echoed these same patterns. These lineages do not share a recent common ancestor that could account for such similarities. Their convergence rests not on inheritance, but on the pressures they encountered. Life within groups, where individuals must track relationships over time, places demands that reach beyond immediate survival. Memory must extend across seasons. Recognition must distinguish not only faces but intentions. Actions ripple outward, influencing future interactions in ways that require anticipation and restraint. Within primates, these pressures shaped minds capable of holding layered information. Observations in chimpanzees reveal memory that stretches across extended intervals, allowing them to recall specific events and adjust behavior accordingly. Their interactions show an awareness of cause and effect that extends beyond simple association, and learned behaviors can pass through groups, forming patterns that persist across generations. In the oceans, bottlenose dolphins navigate a different medium yet arrive at comparable capacities. Their communication includes distinct acoustic signatures, stable over time, allowing individuals to identify one another through sound alone. Encounters with reflective surfaces suggest a level of self-awareness, a recognition that the image returned is not another being but a reflection of the self. Elephants, moving through landscapes, shaped by long distances and shifting resources, display memory anchored in place and relationship. Herds maintain connections over years, and individuals have been observed returning to sites where members of their group have died. Their interactions with these remains suggest a continuity of recognition that persists beyond immediate presence. Above, within the cognitive world of corvids, similar patterns arise through entirely different neural structures. Ravens, lacking the layered cortex typical of mammalian brains, nonetheless demonstrate planning that extends into the future. They store resources with an awareness of potential theft, altering their behavior when observed by others. Their actions indicate an ability to consider perspectives beyond their own immediate state. What binds these examples is not a shared design, but a shared outcome. Different biological systems, shaped by distinct histories, arrive at similar solutions when confronted with comparable challenges. The pathways differ, yet the destination aligns. Intelligence, in this sense, appears not as an isolated accident, but as a recurring response to certain conditions. When environments favor cooperation, competition within groups, and the long-term tracking of relationships, minds expand to meet those demands. The form this expansion takes depends on the material available, but the result, a capacity for flexible behavior, memory, and awareness, emerges again and again. Within the broader unfolding of life, this pattern sits alongside others already traced, a quiet indication that certain problems invite certain kinds of answers, no matter where they arise. In a landscape shaped by shifting climates and widening grasslands, a quiet adjustment in posture began to alter the direction of an entire lineage. It was not immediately dramatic, nor did it announce itself through size or strength. Instead, it unfolded through balance, through the steady placement of one foot before the other, until upright movement became the defining rhythm of a new kind of primate. Around 7 million years ago, within Africa's changing mosaic of woodland and open terrain, this transition separated one population from its closest relatives. The earliest distinction was not an enlarged brain, but a reorientation of the body. Walking on two legs carried advantages that extended across distance and time. Energy was conserved across long journeys. The hands, no longer required for locomotion, became available for carrying, for shaping, for interaction with the environment in increasingly precise ways. The head, elevated above the body, gained a broader field of vision, allowing awareness to extend farther across the landscape. This shift carried consequences embedded deep within anatomy. The restructuring of the pelvis, necessary for upright motion, narrowed the passage through which new life would emerge. At the same time, the trajectory of brain expansion had begun, slowly at first, then with increasing momentum. The intersection of these trends created a delicate balance where birth required careful timing and development extended beyond what had been typical for earlier primates. Infancy lengthened, and with it came a prolonged period of dependency during which learning could unfold. By the interval between 3 and 2 million years ago, this lineage was not a single path but a branching set of possibilities. Multiple hominin species moved across the same regions, each shaped by slightly different adaptations. Some retained smaller brains, paired with robust bodies suited for specific diets. Others showed early signs of increased cognitive capacity alongside more flexible behavior. These were parallel experiments, coexisting without a single predetermined outcome. Within one branch, the pace of neurological change accelerated. Over roughly 3 million years, brain volume expanded from modest beginnings to a size unprecedented among terrestrial animals. This growth was not simply a matter of scale. The internal organization of the brain became more complex, supporting memory, planning, and the coordination of increasingly intricate actions. The energy required to sustain such tissue is substantial, and a shift in diet played a role in meeting those demands. The controlled use of fire, emerging around 1 million years ago, altered the relationship between organism and environment. Cooking transformed food, breaking down structures that would otherwise require extended digestion. Nutrients became more accessible, and energy could be redirected toward other biological processes. This change rippled through physiology, reducing the relative size of the digestive system while supporting further neural expansion. As time moved forward, communication deepened into something more structured. The ability to produce and interpret symbolic sounds allowed information to pass not only through observation but through shared meaning. Language carried memory beyond individual experience, enabling knowledge to accumulate across generations. Skills, strategies, and understandings no longer needed to be rediscovered each time. They could be preserved, refined, and extended. This capacity introduced a form of inheritance distinct from biology. While genetic information continued to pass through reproduction, another layer of adaptation emerged, carried through minds, and transmitted through interaction. Each generation could begin not from the baseline of instinct alone, but from a foundation shaped by those who came before. Within the broader arc of life's history, this transition represents a shift in the medium through which change occurs. The pace of biological evolution remained, steady and continuous, yet alongside it, a second process began to unfold, one capable of moving far more quickly, guided by memory, communication, and shared experience. Across the most recent layer of time, the surface of the planet begins to change, not through gradual shifts of climate or tectonics, but through the coordinated actions of a single species. The transformation is visible in patterns that stretch across continents, in the rearrangement of land, in the quiet disappearance of others whose presence once defined entire regions. Within the last 10,000 years, a new relationship with the environment took hold. In multiple places, separated by distance and culture, human communities began cultivating plants and managing animals. This shift from movement to settlement altered the balance between population and resource. Food production became more predictable, and with that stability came expansion. Numbers that once remained in the millions rose steadily, then rapidly, until they reached into the billions. As populations grew, so did the scale of change. Forests were cleared to create fields. Rivers were redirected, contained, or diverted. Cities expanded outward, reshaping the land into structured networks of habitation and movement. Today, a majority of the ice-free surface of Earth bears the imprint of these activities, each modification layered upon the last, forming a continuous pattern of alteration. Alongside these changes, species began to vanish at a pace that exceeds the quiet background rhythm of extinction that has persisted throughout deep time. Under natural conditions, species disappear gradually, balanced by the emergence of new forms. Now, the rate has accelerated, moving far beyond that baseline. Many lineages that evolved over millions of years have ended within spans that are brief by comparison. Movement across the planet, once limited by natural barriers, has also shifted. Humans have carried organisms beyond the boundaries that once contained them. Plants and animals have been introduced into environments where they had no prior history, sometimes flourishing in the absence of predators, sometimes disrupting established systems. These introductions ripple outward, altering relationships among species in ways that extend beyond immediate observation. In the oceans, changes follow a similar pattern. Waters have warmed and absorbed increasing amounts of carbon, altering chemical balances that have remained stable over long intervals. Marine ecosystems respond in complex ways, with some species adapting, others declining, and still others disappearing entirely. The interconnected nature of these systems means that changes in one part influence the whole, often in ways that unfold slowly, then suddenly. Across the planet, thousands of species are now identified as at risk, their futures uncertain within the current trajectory. This pattern, observed across land and sea, carries the characteristics of a mass extinction, not driven by external forces, but by the cumulative effects of a single, highly adaptable organism. Yet, within this unfolding process, there exists a condition without precedent in the long history of life. The same species that is altering the biosphere possesses the capacity to observe, to measure, and to understand these changes. Evidence can be gathered, patterns recognized, and outcomes projected into the future. The mechanisms behind the transformation are not hidden. They can be studied, described, and communicated. This awareness introduces a new dimension into the process. Previous extinctions, shaped by forces beyond the control of living systems, unfolded without the possibility of intervention from within. In this case, the trajectory is linked to choices, to decisions made collectively and individually, to the ways in which knowledge is applied or set aside. The present moment, then, exists within a tension between momentum and awareness. The patterns of change continue, shaped by systems already in motion, yet accompanied by an understanding that has the potential to influence what follows. Within that balance, the future remains open, shaped not only by forces acting upon life, but by life acting upon itself. In the layered pages of stone, where traces of vanished worlds rest in quiet succession, a pattern emerges that does not depend on any single era. Each interval of loss is followed, not by restoration, but by transformation, as life reorganizes itself into forms that would have been difficult to imagine from what came before. The record of past extinctions carries this rhythm with consistency. When the great dying at the end of the Permian unfolded, removing the vast majority of species from land and sea, the immediate aftermath was not a flourishing, but a long interval of biological scarcity. Ecosystems simplified, dominated by organisms capable of enduring unstable conditions. Over time, new lineages rose into prominence, many of which had existed quietly before, holding positions that had once been peripheral. A similar sequence followed the end of the Cretaceous. The earliest stages of recovery did not produce grandeur or diversity, but rather small, adaptable organisms occupying a landscape still in the process of stabilization. Complexity returned gradually, built layer by layer, as interactions between species deepened and diversified. The eventual richness of later periods rested upon this initial simplicity, a foundation assembled under constraint. Across these cycles, one feature remains consistent. The species that define the world after a mass extinction are rarely those that appeared dominant before it. Instead, survival favors those able to persist through disruption. Small body size, flexible diets, and the ability to occupy a range of environments become decisive advantages. Specialization, which in stable times can provide efficiency and success, becomes a liability when conditions shift beyond recognition. In the present, a set of organisms already displays these traits. They inhabit cities, agricultural landscapes, and fragmented habitats, moving easily between human structures and the surrounding environment. Their diets are broad, their behaviors adaptable, their reproduction rapid. They do not depend on narrow ecological conditions, and they persist where others decline. Creatures such as rats and pigeons navigate urban spaces with ease, adjusting to fluctuations in food availability and shelter. Coyotes extend their range into territories shaped by human presence, altering their behavior without losing effectiveness. Crows demonstrate problem-solving abilities that allow them to exploit new opportunities as they arise. Invertebrates, such as cockroaches and certain marine organisms, continue to thrive under conditions that would limit more specialized forms. These species are often viewed as ordinary or even undesirable within the context of human preference. Yet, within the broader framework of evolution, they embody a set of characteristics that have repeatedly proven effective during periods of transition. Their success does not arise from dominance in stable systems, but from resilience when stability breaks down. The fossil record suggests that if current trends continue, the future biosphere will not resemble the one that exists today. Diversity may contract before expanding again, and the organisms that shape that expansion will likely emerge from those already adapted to variability and disturbance. Over extended spans of time, new forms will arise, diversifying and filling ecological roles in ways that cannot be predicted in detail. This process unfolds without intention, guided by the interplay between environment and adaptation. Life does not return to previous states, nor does it follow a fixed direction. It responds to the conditions present, finding pathways that allow persistence, then building upon them. From this perspective, the future remains open yet bounded by patterns that have repeated across deep time. Reduction, survival, and gradual renewal form a sequence that has occurred again and again. What follows will not be a restoration of what is now, but the emergence of something different, shaped by the same underlying principles that have guided life through every transformation before. Imagine the entire history of Earth not as a sequence of eras, but as a single turning cycle, a quiet orbit measured in 1 year. Oceans condense early, continents gather and drift, life begins in forms too small to see. For most of that long passage, complexity unfolds slowly, almost imperceptibly, until the closing days arrive with increasing density. Within that calendar, the event that reshaped life 66 million years ago occurs late in the final week of December. Everything that has followed, every expansion and transformation traced through these sections, unfolds within the last few days of that imagined year. The emergence of upright walkers arrives only in the final hour. The appearance of anatomically modern humans takes place within the final minutes. The entirety of recorded history, from the first marks pressed into clay to the present moment, occupies only the last seconds before midnight. Placed against this scale, the present becomes both brief and dense. It is not reduced in importance, but reframed, held within a context that extends far beyond immediate perception. Each moment carries with it a continuity that reaches backward through layers of time too vast to experience directly, yet preserved in the structures that surround and compose us. The materials that form living bodies carry histories that precede the planet itself. Elements were assembled in environments far removed from Earth, within stars that lived and ended long before this system took shape. Those materials drifted, gathered, and became part of the planet, entering cycles that moved through rock, water, and atmosphere. Over immense intervals, they were incorporated into living systems, released and incorporated again, repeating through countless transformations. Within this continuity, life persists not as a single line, but as an unbroken chain of connections. Each organism arises from those that came before, carrying forward structures shaped by conditions no longer present. The continuity is not visible in any one moment, yet it exists in every moment, linking present forms to origins that extend beyond memory. At one point along that chain, a small animal endured conditions that reshaped the entire biosphere. It did not perceive the scale of what was occurring. It responded to immediate pressures, moving, feeding, reproducing, passing forward the traits that allowed it to persist. From that survival, repeated across generations, complexity accumulated, branching into forms that would eventually include beings capable of reflection. That capacity introduces a rare perspective. To observe the past through evidence preserved in stone and structure is to extend awareness beyond the present, to reconstruct sequences that no individual could witness directly. It allows the present moment to be understood not as an isolated point, but as part of a continuous process unfolding over immense spans. Within this understanding, the weight of now takes on a different quality. It is shaped by the recognition that every current condition rests upon countless prior transitions, each one contributing to the present configuration. The future, though uncertain in its details, will follow the same principle, emerging from what exists now, shaped by interactions that extend beyond immediate awareness. Time, in this sense, does not diminish the present. It surrounds it, giving it depth and continuity. The final moments of the year are brief, yet they carry within them the entire history that preceded them, compressed into a point where awareness can turn back and recognize the path that led here. Beneath every living form, there is a history not only of continuity, but of interruption. The shapes that move across land, through water, and beneath the open sky are not simply the result of steady unfolding. They are the outcomes of moments when continuity was broken, when systems collapsed, and when the path forward narrowed to a few surviving threads. The present world, in all its diversity, rests upon those interruptions. Entire lineages that now seem essential emerged only after earlier ones disappeared. The absence of what came before created the conditions in which new forms could take hold, expand, and define the landscapes that followed. Without those absences, the current arrangement would not exist in any recognizable form. Across deep time, this pattern repeats with a quiet consistency. Major disruptions remove dominant groups, not selectively but broadly, reshaping ecosystems at every level. What follows is not a restoration of the previous balance, but a reassembly, guided by what remains. The survivors, often small and flexible, carry forward traits that were once secondary, and under new conditions, those traits become central. This sequence extends far beyond the most visible events. Alongside the large-scale extinctions, countless smaller shifts have occurred, each one altering populations, redirecting lineages, and influencing which traits persisted. Local collapses, climate fluctuations, and shifting environments have all contributed to the gradual refinement of living systems. The result is not a single continuous ascent, but a series of adjustments shaped by pressures that varied in scale and intensity. Within each organism, this history is preserved in subtle ways. The structures that support immunity reflect encounters with pathogens encountered across generations. Responses to threat carry traces of environments where survival depended on rapid recognition of danger. Even social behaviors, the ways in which individuals relate to one another, have been shaped by conditions where cooperation influenced persistence. These features were not designed with foresight. They emerged because, in specific contexts, they allowed certain individuals to survive and reproduce more effectively than others. Over time, these differences accumulated, producing systems that appear intricate and coordinated, yet are grounded in processes that operate without intention. From this perspective, complexity is not a goal that evolution pursues. It arises when conditions favor traits that happen to produce it. Intelligence, structure, and diversity are outcomes of countless interactions between organisms and their environments, each one filtered through survival and reproduction. The continuity that leads to any present organism is therefore a record of persistence through change. Every generation represents a point at which survival was possible, and every trait carried forward reflects conditions that shaped that survival. The lineage remains unbroken, not because it was protected, but because it adapted repeatedly to shifting circumstances. To exist within this sequence is to be part of a process that extends far beyond individual experience. The present moment contains within it the results of events that were neither predictable nor directed, yet collectively produced the conditions that allow life to continue. In this light, the relationship between disruption and creation becomes clear. Change does not arise only from gradual accumulation, but also from the spaces opened when previous structures fall away. What follows fills those spaces, shaped by what persists and by the conditions that define the new environment. The living world, as it exists now, is therefore inseparable from the disruptions that preceded it. Each form carries forward a history that includes both continuity and loss, woven together into a pattern that continues to unfold. At some point along this long unfolding, the patterns begin to resemble intention. The repeated emergence of form, the refinement of structure, the appearance of systems that seem almost purposeful can give the quiet impression that something is guiding the process forward. Yet beneath that impression, there is only a simple mechanism operating without awareness, without foresight, and without preference. Life persists through replication. Each generation carries forward variations, small differences shaped by inheritance and circumstance. Within any population, some individuals leave more descendants than others, not by design, but because their traits happen to align with the conditions surrounding them. Over time, those traits become more common, while others fade, not through decision, but through absence. This process does not aim toward complexity. It does not seek intelligence or elegance. It does not recognize success or failure in any abstract sense. It simply filters what exists, allowing certain forms to continue while others quietly end. When repeated across vast spans of time, this filtering accumulates, producing outcomes that appear intricate, yet arise from countless local interactions. The structures that seem most remarkable are not the result of a plan. They are the result of persistence under constraint. A body adapts because it must function within its environment. A sensory system refines because it affects survival. A behavior spreads because it increases the likelihood of reproduction. Each change is small, grounded in immediate context, yet the accumulation of these changes creates forms that seem far removed from their origins. The absence of direction is what gives the process its depth. Without a fixed endpoint, variation explores many possibilities at once. Some paths end quickly. Others continue, shaped by shifting conditions. What remains is not what was intended, but what endured. The continuity of life is therefore not a story of progress, but of survival through changing circumstances. Across millions of years, this accumulation produces outcomes that can be difficult to reconcile with their origins. Systems emerge that process information, coordinate movement, and respond to the environment with increasing subtlety. These systems do not arise because they are desired, but because, at each step, they provided an advantage within a specific context. The diversity of life reflects this open-ended process. Different lineages, facing different conditions, arrive at different solutions. Some become highly specialized, others remain flexible. Some expand into new environments, others persist within narrow ranges. There is no hierarchy guiding these outcomes, only the interaction between variation and environment. When viewed in this way, the continuity from the earliest forms of life to the present becomes a single, unbroken chain of reproduction and variation. Every organism exists because its lineage persisted through countless generations, each one shaped by conditions that no longer exist. The present moment contains the cumulative result of those interactions, not as a final state, but as a point within an ongoing process. The patterns that emerge can feel improbable, not because they were unlikely in isolation, but because they required vast amounts of time and countless iterations. Given enough variation and enough generations, complexity can arise without intention, shaped by the steady influence of survival and reproduction. Within this process, awareness itself appears, a capacity to observe and reflect on the sequence that produced it. This awareness does not alter the underlying mechanism, yet it allows the process to be understood, at least in part. The recognition of this mechanism does not assign it purpose, but it reveals how outcomes that seem purposeful can emerge without guidance. What remains is a quiet clarity. The living world is not the result of a plan unfolding, but of a process continuing, shaped by conditions that shift across time. From that process, forms arise, persist, and change, each one part of a continuum that extends far beyond any single moment. Beneath a surface still warm from distant fire, something small settled into stillness, its body curved into the narrow safety of stone and soil. Above, the air carried particles that dimmed the light, and the ground held the fading memory of upheaval. None of this was understood, only endured, as breath slowed and the long hours passed without pattern or certainty. That fragile persistence did not announce itself as important. It was one life continuing, nothing more, shaped by immediate needs that repeated from moment to moment. Yet in that quiet continuation, a thread remained unbroken, passing forward through generations that would never know the origin of what they carried. Time unfolded, not as a sequence of events perceived by any single mind, but as a continuous shaping of forms. Bodies changed, environments shifted, and lineages branched and narrowed, each adapting within the limits of circumstance. The descendants of that hidden survivor moved through forests, across open ground, into water and into air, their forms reflecting the conditions that surrounded them. Within this unfolding, structures emerged that allowed greater sensitivity to the world. Sensory systems refined, movements coordinated, and interactions between individuals grew more complex. None of these developments aimed toward awareness as it is now understood, yet they created the conditions in which awareness could arise. Much later, within one lineage among many, the capacity to reflect appeared, not suddenly, but as an accumulation of abilities that allowed memory, anticipation, and communication to intertwine. This capacity did not alter the past, but it illuminated it, bringing into focus the long chain of events that led to its presence. The same sky that once dimmed under falling debris now appears as a field of distant light, observed from a surface that has changed in ways too gradual for any single generation to perceive. The elements that compose living bodies have cycled through countless forms, moving through air, water, and stone, assembling and dispersing, then assembling again in new arrangements. The connection between those early moments and the present does not depend on intention or direction. It exists because each generation continued, passing forward what allowed it to persist. The continuity is uninterrupted, extending from that sheltered life to every organism now alive, each one part of the same ongoing process. Within this continuity, understanding itself becomes one of the outcomes, a way for the process to be observed from within. The ability to reconstruct the past from fragments, to trace patterns across immense spans of time, does not stand apart from the process that produced it. It is one of its expressions. The living world, in all its variety, reflects this shared origin. Differences in form and function arise from the same underlying mechanism, shaped by different conditions and histories. What appears separate is connected through descent, each lineage a variation on a common theme, carried forward through time. The present moment holds all of this without announcing it. The ground beneath, the air above, and the life moving through both are part of a continuity that extends far beyond immediate perception. The story is not contained within any single era or form, but moves through them, reshaping itself as conditions change. There is no final point at which this process concludes. It continues as long as life persists, adapting, diversifying, and responding to new circumstances. The edge of this process is always shifting, defined by what exists now and what will follow. From a small, hidden life, enduring a single night, to a mind capable of tracing that endurance across vast stretches of time, the connection remains unbroken, carried quietly through each generation, present in every living form, and continuing forward without pause.